All right. Should be sharing my screen there. So we're still waiting on a few people. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so Dawn, Christy, Melissa, nice to meet you in person, kind of. Janet's on. All right.
It's nice to be here today with you.
Thank you. So we need Matt, and we know Jason's going to be a little bit late. Okay. Tom. Is there? Okay. What's our sound situation?
Just keep going in person.
Liars. You know what? I bet if we had you turn off and turn on with it plugged in, it would work.
You think?
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't I just try that?
Let's try it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're having a little trouble with the big screen, and I'm going to see if I can get it to go since we're still waiting on a couple. All right, stop share.
So you're saying just for
Still no Matt. Anybody heard from Matt?
I just texted him.
Okay,
He hasn't
great.
responded yet.
All righty. Duly noted that all the ladies are on time. Morning, Jason.
Good morning. Sorry I'm late.
No problem. I'm not sharing the right screen, am I? Let's get this going. There we go. So no word back from Matt yet.
He would probably say start without him.
Okay. All right. Don, when you're ready, let me know and we can start if you're ready to start.
Oh, I'm ready. Do you want me to, am I calling the meeting to order?
Yeah, you need to.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll call the select board meeting to order, October 13th, 10:15 a.m. We'll be doing strategic planning today. We are meeting remotely due to Governor Baker's declaration of a state of emergency in Massachusetts due to COVID-19. And we have all been encouraged to participate remotely. We are in a Zoom webinar, which will allow public access, but at the moment we have no attendees. And I'm just gonna leave it at that.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you all for getting together this gray morning and talking a little bit about how the board is working together and what your plans and priorities and hopes are for the coming year. So again, I'm Julia Novak, familiar to all of you, except for this is my first time meeting Melissa face-to-face, so it's nice to meet the new select board members. I'm joined by two colleagues today, Catherine Carter and Julie Giesecke. Julie Giesecke will be with us just for our morning today as we do kind of the first piece of the retreat. So the way we have structured our retreat this week, so we're going to spend this morning kind of working on what I call the governance issues. give you all as a board an opportunity to process kind of the last 6 months. Nantucket was my last trip before the universe kind of shut down on us due to COVID-19. And there's been a lot that's happened with the murder of George Floyd, the protests and civil unrest really across this country. And it's impacted our local policymakers. And we want to give you a chance to talk about how that has impacted you as you fulfill your duties as a member of the select board. We're going to break at noon. And then when we come back, we're going to shift gears and talk about strategic planning. This board has a great history. I think 2018 was when you adopted your first strategic plan. So you all have been really focused on several goals. Last year when we met, we added a new goal, and we have an opportunity this year to kind of consider that strategic planning framework in the context of everything that we've lived through in the last 6 months, and ask the question, are there any new goals that we want to add to the strategic planning framework? We'll go through, make those decisions about whether we add any new goals, look at the existing goal statements and see if there's a need to tweak them at all. We've spent some time on the language there, but we want to make sure that everyone is, those success statements still resonate with you all. Then we'll have some time to kind of reorganize and regroup and reconvene with you all again Thursday afternoon from 4 to 6. We'll finalize any goal statements. If there's a new goal statement, we'll have suggested language for you. That'll be something that we do. And bring it back a straw man for you all to consider, and then talk about any particular priorities that you have as individual board members before we kind of finalize the strategic plan and shift gears and help the staff move forward with implementation. So any questions about the order of the day or days and what we're hoping to accomplish? Nope, I can see kind of heads shaking a little bit, so I'm just going to go forward with if you're ready to say something, jump in and say something. So let's first, I want to give you a chance to check in because I want to hear from you and hear what your hopes are for our strategic planning session today. So we'll ask both the select board members as well as the town manager and other staff that are participating today to also kind of share their expectations for the strategic plan. So anybody can take themselves off mute and begin.
I can go.
Thank you.
For strategic planning, I mean, what we've kind of decided to do on a yearly basis is to revisit our goals and priorities and recategorize them, see what else is going on in the world. And of course, this year is quite dramatic in terms of how our world has changed. And I'm really excited to actually talk about what differences we see on Nantucket and in the world, and how we might want to rework some of these priorities, or bring in other pieces, bring things into focus, maybe with some of the quality of life things that we've talked about. And so
great.
That's what
Thank you. So I'm going to go around the horn in order that I see you, which may be different from how you see the world, but Christy, that makes you next.
Hi.
Hi.
So I think Dawn covered it, but in terms of what I want to get out of it is just looking at what our goals were last year, and now it's been probably 15 months since we last discussed it, and seeing as a result of COVID and things that have been going on the island, what things need room for improvement, and then just longer term, what are other things that we want to think about that we just haven't been discussing in the past year.
Okay. Thank you. Jason.
The way I was thinking about this morning is, how do we look at all the progress we've made in our strategic planning, look at our goals with this new knowledge and this new lens of the pandemic, right? And what you put up, the protest and do we need to adapt it at all? Is it going to reprioritize it all? And I think having that discussion in a setting like this versus trying to, digging into it for 20 minutes on a Wednesday night, I'm looking forward to that. And just every time that we've gotten together since this started, we've been able to prioritize better. We've been able to communicate better because we know the basic direction we're heading towards. And so that's what I'm really excited and looking forward to for today.
Great. Thank you. Melissa.
Good morning. Well, I'm really happy to participate in my first strategic planning session with the town. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk about lessons learned in the pandemic, and something that's been on my mind. And I know I've spoken with Libby about, from both a board and staff perspective, just being able to create the space to think about what we did well and what we could improve on, and also, how we plan to live with this virus over the next year, how we're going to need to be able to continue to adapt to support businesses and community members in the absence of a vaccine or any of those things that will make us return to quote unquote normal. And I'm also really excited to explore the previous strategic plan goals. I think, like Jason just said, through the lens of things we now know are very important to the community, particularly equity and diversity, and how that will influence and shape all of those areas that we have in our plan, and all of the areas in terms of our community life. And I also just really appreciate the touch point to make sure that what was a priority 15 months ago remains a priority, and make space for things that may have revealed themselves to us as taking greater priority. So just grateful to be here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me turn to Libby. What are you hoping for from this retreat?
Okay, so I jotted down a few things. I always appreciate the opportunity during a retreat like this to give the town admin perspective to the board. There are a lot of things that can't really be conveyed one-on-one necessarily, or at weekly meetings. So this is a good opportunity for us to be able to do that. I'm hoping that as we're going through the pandemic response in particular, and even going through the strategic plan, there's a lot of activity going on in town administration, not even including anything to do with the pandemic. There's been a lot, and a lot of items were dropped when we had to drop everything to deal with the pandemic, and those things have not entirely gone away. There's a toll that has been taken on town staff, but with the pandemic, and it's real. Some people have been able to go on a bit of a vacation. Some people have not. And those of us that haven't really done that, we're kind of like stretched. So yeah, just FYI, I think everybody knows that, and I think the board's been pretty good at acknowledging that and encouraging people to take the time they can, but not everybody can do that. So there's that, and that does impact taking on new things sometimes. Expectations need to be realistic. As I said, we have a lot going on. We have a whole new area that we've taken on, the diversity, equity, and inclusion area, with a new position coming online. That has shifted our focus significantly to that area. And at the same time, I think we're expected to keep up with the pandemic response, the strategic plan implementation, never mind the day-to-day, including, weekly board meetings, preparing and following up. There's just a lot going on there. So I hope we're going to be realistic about new or additional priorities, which we've already started adding. And a lot of those things take additional resources. We already know that our fiscal 21 budget has been reduced by about 60% revenue wise. So we don't have any of the resources or very little of the resources we were hoping to have in 21 to move ahead with some of our priorities here. And I don't know that we're going to have them in 22 because our preliminary budget projections don't look fantastic, although Brian just gave me some sort of good news about the rooms tax for June, July, August, and September. But nonetheless, we're going to be stretched, I think, in fiscal 22. A lot of competing demands, like Melissa said, the businesses are going to be looking for assistance. The public is looking for assistance. Everybody's looking for assistance, and they often look to the town for that assistance. And I've got, departments saying, I need more to run my department and do what you want me to do. So everything has to be balanced. We have to look at the big picture of everything. And these individual groups don't look at the big picture. They only look at their picture. It's our job to look at the big picture and prioritize. So hopefully we'll get to some of that. That's
Great.
pretty
Thank
much
you.
all I've jotted down.
Okay. Rachel, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure because it's the first time without using my headphones. Well, like Melissa, I'm new to this conversation and participating. So I think a lot of my expectations is just to understand how the conversation happens and evolves and gets framed, and to understand where the board comes from and why they choose the priority goals that they choose as part of the strategic plan. I'm very interested to know what the goals might be for under quality of life, because I believe last time there weren't really any established. That was sort of later. So I think a lot of the work that a few people have already mentioned would fall under that. And I think we have been doing our best as staff and town admin to also take into all the consideration what Libby was mentioning, the requests and asks of the departments and where we might prioritize them that would fall under that. So that to me would be an expectation to just understand truly what the board's goals are for there, so that we can try and meet some of them or start working towards them with the minimal resources. And that includes staff, not just financially, but also staff and staff time. So that's ultimately where I'm coming from. So it's a little bit of a learning curve for me, but I am excited to participate. Thank you.
I appreciate that you said that, Rachel, because I forgot that this is your first time at this retreat setting. So thank you for reminding us of that. We're so used to you that we just would have not entered my mind. So Melissa, you're not alone in being new to this. So that's comforting, right? So thank you. And Janet, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Great.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So as the person who's been sort of staffing this process for as long as it's been going on almost, I'm really looking forward to see how the priorities will be adjusted by what's happened since the pandemic and the DEI response. But I'm also mindful that many of the things in the strategic planning process are things that can't wait either, like the dump contracts got to get renewed. So a lot of these things can't get pushed too far aside because they're realities. So how this all gets balanced, as Libby suggested, is going to be interesting. And I think where it's possible to move things a little to the back burner, if we can, this is the opportunity to do that, to allow us to really respond as fully as we can and as we have to the issues that the pandemic has brought forward to us.
Yeah, certainly, what's important now, given everything that we've been through, is a critical part of the conversation. So appreciate you all kind of recognizing that and being on the same page. And so now what we want to do is go ahead and shift into this conversation about the impact of the pandemic. And specifically, I had provided some prompt questions about how to kind of give you some thought-stirring ideas of what to talk about here in terms of how the pandemic and the protests, to whatever degree they have occurred here in your community, how has that impacted you all as a board? So I think tomorrow we have a session with the cabinet, and we're gonna probe a little differently with them in terms of what's worked and how the response was, and what did they do well and where did they get in the way. This is really a time for you all to step back and reflect on this experience from your position as a board member. So how has this pandemic affected how you view your role? How has the COVID-19 environment impacted how you interact with your colleagues? I mean, obviously, I will say many times when I'm doing these retreats right now, it's the first time the group has been together in the room physically for 6-7 months. And obviously, thanks to Charlie Baker, we don't get to do that today. So we're here still virtually, and obviously that's a big impact on how you interact with one another, and then how you're interacting with the public and with the community. We did a lot of virtual engagement with your community early in this pandemic, but certainly this has been extraordinary times. It's also changes how you interact with the town staff, and, physical in-person meetings, having coffee, the things that you take so for granted, at least we used to, sometimes just can't happen. So how has that impacted how you've worked with the town staff? What's worked? There are some things I think we've learned during this pandemic that can work really well, and there are other things that are incredibly frustrating. And then shift and think about the protests, how they've impacted you as a member of the board. Is there anything that you are kind of rethinking and reframing? I mean, Libby already has, mentioned the diversity and inclusion initiative that the town has undertaken, or equity and diversity, a new position, new resources being added to this area. So how are you rethinking how you govern? And then finally, what's on your radar today that just wasn't there at the beginning of 2020? So with that, I want to give you all time to respond. Julie's going to create a visual capture of this portion of our time together that we'll be able to look at and reflect on. As your colleagues are talking, feel free to take some notes for yourself. We'll want to have a conversation at the end once everyone's had a chance to share about similarities, differences of perceptions and experiences, so that we can process this together. So who would like to begin and kind of put out there what their experience has been during these past 6 months and how it's impacted them? Yay, Jason raised his hand. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I didn't want to
Appreciate that. I was going to have to volunteer somebody.
Well, I didn't want to go on the stereotype like the guy always speaks first. So I kind of waited and I waited. And I waited.
I think it's actually worse when the guy says ladies first. So in this kind of a context. So go ahead, Jason. Thank you.
So I'll just go off. I like how you kind of frame the questions. The first one, how's the pandemic affected how you view your role? I always thought, select board roles is the kind of direct line to the public, right? Is just the grocery store conversations. When you're at the landfill, you're talking to somebody. And that, when the pandemic came in, it was times 10. Whether it was a direct message through Facebook, through phone calls, text, everybody reaching out, and I'm sure to everyone else, but to me, asking for questions. And it was really challenging trying to keep everyone, just getting the information, because nobody had it. I mean, the EOC didn't have it. I mean, everyone was just trying to make decisions with no information, right? The state, had their troubles getting stuff out. And so that was, we already knew, that was one of my roles, but I just didn't know it was that much. I mean, every single night for hours, I was on the phone texting people, trying to reassure them this. I don't know, I'll find out, for months, and eventually I started doing Facebook, live chats just to have an outlet so people can ask questions. And, 80% of them I wouldn't be able to answer, but at least I could kind of pull in information and see what people are asking for. So I think trying to be that megaphone for the town, saying like, everything's going to be okay. We're not sure on this. Here's what we're doing right now, was times 10. I think for everybody, for, staff and board, but that part was really, was heightened. I'll stop there.
Okay. Do you want to not go through the other questions yet? You want to do them one at a time?
Well, yeah, I can go through.
Go ahead and go through them, and we'll just let everyone say their piece, and then we'll talk and process it.
So in that, I guess in that same vein, for the way I connect with people is mostly through, staying outside my coffee shop or in the grocery store. You run into people. That's just like the Nantucket way, and people kind of like, they're either yelling at you about parking or they're asking questions or whatever it is, right? And that barrier is there. You can't stop and really talk to somebody at the grocery store or the landfill or how we used to do it. You can't. It's just, that's been difficult, and not everybody's has technology to connect. So that barrier, connecting with the constituents, was difficult. And I also, with staff too, like I just couldn't chat with Libby, like walking down the street face to face. That was tough. And there'd be some times where if there was some miscommunication, maybe with the department head, I would ask Libby, like, hey, is it okay if I call Chief on this? Or if I call Jeff Carlson and ask him some questions? And we would usually do that face to face over coffee. And that was kind of taken away. That barrier was there. So being able to connect to constituents and staff, working through problems and understanding that was tough. For the protest, I mean, it's just kind of blew everybody away of how to lead through that as a select board member. Like I knew what I wanted to do personally. I knew what I stood for. I knew what was difficult for me. But what was my role as a select board member to lead us through that? There was no definitive way through it. Add on African Meeting House, add on things that happened in February that compounded that. That was, and I wanted to lead through it. I wanted to do the right thing. And I didn't know what those, which direction always to take. And as a select board member, right? Individually, I feel like I knew what to do. So what's the last one? Get us all happened in 6 months. What's on your radar? I think communications, and I've expressed this to Libby, and we've never been through anything like the 2020, and the EOC and the leaders there did the best they could do. But I, as a control freak, wanted to know everything that was going on, but I'm a volunteer. Town leadership had to make fast decisions with no information. And kind of going back to my first answer, our first question, trying, everybody coming to us, asking us for questions. It was really tough. Not calling anybody out or anything, but I just think the process of how do we communicate through a pandemic like that, from the roles of the select board, even if I knew, like, Jason, all right, you're not going to get this kind of information. This is your role in a pandemic. You do policy, and you don't get a way in on this. We'll tell you. Like, even if that was scripted out, or if I understood it better, I think it would help me. Whether it's a sewer break or whatever the next major hurricane that comes in, what are our roles as the spokespeople for the town, as representing people who elected us. And so I think I was talking to another select board member in Truro this week, and he was saying that he brought it up before I did, that their communications was a challenge. Like we're all too small to have a communications director or a press secretary, so to speak. But maybe we need to start thinking about how to do that. Maybe it's an FY22 budget. Maybe it's down the road. But I think it would help select board. It would help departments to be able to get the information out and kind of control it and communicate. All right, that was a lot. Stop.
Yeah, no, that's great. You made me smile a little bit talking about kind of, what is our role in a pandemic? What do we do? And so often we look to the EOC playbook and all the different scenarios that are there. And I will tell you that in all of our clients, we had exactly one client that had a pandemic scenario in their EOC emergency plans. It was for a regional pandemic, so also useless. But it is just not something that local governments have really been prepared to expect. We expected something different, and so that sense of uncertainty about roles is something that you would have a lot of kindred feelings all across the country. So, thank you, Jason. Who would like to go next?
I'd like to wait since I'm the newest member.
Okay.
So I'm just going
She
to throw
has
that out
invoked
there. I have not been here 6 months, so.
Okay. She invoked the "I'm new, don't make me go next" thing. All right. I see both Christy and Dawn raised their hands. So if we go by tenure, I'll go to Dawn and then we'll still let Christy be kind of new. How's that?
Okay. I mean, this is actually not something we've done before, so it's new to all of us. But
Right.
the pandemic and my role, what I feel like was particularly heightened, being in the chair role when this all hit, and just the community so needing people to look to and to inform them, and everyone just trying to jump in and do the best that they could with like the EOC that's set up for a hurricane event, a thing that lasts for a few days, not for a year. Or I mean, during the worst of it, we were meeting daily for what I mean, a couple, maybe like 6 weeks. Was it daily? I don't even remember. It's such a blur.
Pandemic time is a fascinating physics study. It's like, is it a year or is it a week? It's the same time.
And I mean, I'm very thankful. A lot of people have certainly looked to all of us for answers, and leading the Board of Health into their role and a much bigger responsibility than they ever thought that they would have to deal with when they're normally just reviewing septic systems and genetically engineered mice, that kind of thing. Figuring out how to work with the hospital, Roberto moving into such a heightened role, Libby moving into such a heightened role, and everyone else. It's just been very interesting. And I've never experienced having, I think we had like 600 people watching some of our meetings, and really wanting to participate. And to this, still, I get stopped by people like every other day and say, thank you for everything that you all have been doing. Then how has it impacted? Oh, well, it's been a lot harder to figure out how to communicate. Like Jason said that quite well. Normally we have so much face-to-face, and that's been hard to switch into all of this Zoom. I have a little bit of trouble staying focused when we're on Zoom. Rethinking, reframing on how we govern. It's just been a massive learning curve, doing everything remotely like this. And, even this, I was so looking forward to us all getting in the same room together and being able to do this. And it's just so much harder this way. And in terms of how we govern, I mean, I think that we've just all been shaken with how fragile what we know is, and how to, maybe reprioritize what we appreciate. That was not a concern at the start of 2020. I don't even know how to put that into words, but there wasn't nearly the concern with political unrest as there is now. And I'm concerned about our community in particular, what financial impacts we have that haven't hit yet, that will come to light, I think, over this winter. Once we get out of the season. I think we were very fortunate to have a very strong summer, even though the spring was very bleak on the island. But I don't think that it made up for the losses and what we'll see coming into the dead of the winter.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dawn. So I think Christy, you're up now. So thanks for volunteering.
Of course. So I think Don and Jason really covered kind of how our role changed. We definitely, I mean, we've always been public facing, but the amount of phone calls, text, emails, it was overwhelming. And as Jason put, we didn't know the answers and everybody was looking to us for the answers. I think another challenge for that is, being a volunteer and the amount of emails. It was, sometimes I would think if everybody got this email, maybe Jason or Don or Rita might answer this one, or Melissa, and I don't have to. And then we'd get a follow-up a couple of days later, like, hey, nobody responded to me. And so it was always hard to know who was responding to who or who might have an answer. So I'd spend time tracking down an answer, and maybe Jason already responded to this person. So by the time I wrote back to them, they'd say, oh, I already knew this. And so it's like, how do we all figure out who's handling what in times of crisis, but also just day to day? I mean, sometimes all 5 of us get an email, and sometimes it's just me, or they just send it individually to people. So I think that was something that I kind of struggled with, is when to respond or whose responsibility it is to respond.
Good.
I also thought about how we really increased access. Kind of the good thing of moving to Zoom was, as Dawn mentioned, like we had, I think, like 650 people watch one of the first Zoom meetings that we had. And when we had the YouTube comments opened, a lot of it was conversation going back and forth between constituents, but the amount of valid input that we got, we never get that in our weekly meetings when they were in person. So I thought that was a really helpful tool to actually be hearing from the constituents as we were making policy decisions. And that's continued with people raising their hands. I just see less people logging in to raise their hand than we did when we had the YouTube comments. I found that Zoom made it for me easier to talk to the whole board. So when we were in Six Fairgrounds, I always had people sitting on either side to me. So when I was talking, it was like trying to look at Dawn and trying to look at Matt and trying to, see people's responses, or, being able to see who's going to talk next. Whereas right now, raising hands, I guess that's one of the challenges, is I'll want to say something, and by the time it comes to me, it's like we're on a different subject, or you want to circle back to that subject. So that's a challenge. But I like the Zoom format that I can kind of see everybody I'm talking to and responses, and really feel like we're having a conversation. What's the next question? How the protests affected you as select board. So I think that's something that I have been working on personally, is, how to look at systemic racism and deal with that on a personal level. And when everything kind of broke out in the end of May, beginning of June, I didn't know how to do that in a select board role, and things that I felt comfortable saying, to friends and family, I didn't know if I felt as comfortable saying, on YouTube to all of our constituents, and trying to deal with some of those kind of, not insecurities, but how do you talk about race? And it's uncomfortable. And we had to do it in front of everybody. And I think we talked about in March, trying to do more racial equity training. And I think it's something that we should continue to look at, so that we know how to handle questions and how to respond to the public. And it's something that it's not one training is going to help us with this. It's something that's continuous and we'll have to keep working on. But that was something that I felt it was a really big challenge, and how to respond to the emails that we got. And we got things on both sides, with the recent renaming of Coon Street. We had so many people writing in what I would think is ridiculous comments. And that's how they felt. And I didn't know how to respond when I see something one way and they see it as a completely different way. And all that's happened in the last 6 months. One of the big things is communication. I think I've realized, the town government, it's the largest entity or employer on the island. A lot of people had trouble getting questions answered, and that was being in the state of a pandemic. But when restaurants were trying to figure out how to reopen, they'd be contacting the health department and not hearing a response for days or weeks and these people's livelihoods. And it's like, as I was saying before, it's hard for us to answer every email that was coming to select board. It's been hours at night and I'm a volunteer. It's, paid staff doesn't have all the time to answer emails, but it was really tough for people to get answers, and just trying to figure out what our communication stream is. Do we have a public information officer or someone like that, as I think Jason mentioned? But some sort of transparency of trying to figure out how we get the information out to people, and if they do ask questions, making sure that it's a prompt reply. I've also thought a lot about our economic health, and something that we hadn't considered 6 months ago is having, an economic development person or office, somebody that could have been a liaison between, the state and federal elected officials when there were so many questions about grants and federal funding. We didn't really have a point of contact. And I think Melissa mentioned this too, like our businesses are going to need support, and, how do we focus on that? And we have the NPDC, but that, is just a committee, and does this need to be more of a role? And then obviously looking at diversity and inclusion. And I think we're moving in the right direction with the hire and an RFP. I know when we met last June and for the in-person, and we added it to the strategic plan, was to add diversity to our boards and our commissions. But I think it's more than just adding diversity to town operations. It's how do we really incorporate it into how we govern and, what role we play in the community, and focusing on that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, Melissa, Matt hasn't come in to protect you yet, so you're
Julia, no, I don't need protection. My point of going last was actually just that this team of members who have served from the beginning of the pandemic, and I actually, got to be elected in the middle of it, before I could withdraw my nomination papers and say, no, thanks, I don't want to serve during a pandemic.
Yeah, right.
So it was important to me to hear their full perspective. So, coming in the middle of June, we had already moved into, and I think the board had already, and staff had already navigated the bulk of the crisis, and had spent a few months already in reaction, intense emergency mode. And by the time the middle of June came, for my first meeting, the state had started to open us up. Tourism had started to come back to the island. People were getting back to work. And I think that I got to see a little bit of a sense of relief from the intensity that the previous few months had provided for everybody, because, folks were at home and nervous and scared about how things were unrolling. So not only do we see increased public participation, but literally everything was under a microscope because nobody had anywhere else to go or anywhere else to turn for information. So I think that the pandemic has affected how I view the role of select board members, and being the select board member that now serves on the Board of Health, in particular for me, is this constant balance of public health and financial health. Nobody else has really said this, and I don't know where, I don't necessarily want to bring national politics into this, but I do really feel that we've had a lack of leadership and information from the federal government, and reliable information that we can make sound decisions with. And so when we see our federal government, arguing or questioning the CDC on guidelines, that has an impact on how our citizens can trust what rules we're putting in place to protect them if we're using that information to make policy decisions. So I felt the tenuous nature of our national politics really coming into play with how we can make local policy decisions, because if we're not relying on science, or we've got people questioning science, how do we make those decisions that balance those things of public health and financial health. And I think we just saw that this past week in our Board of Health meeting, there were recommendations to put stricter policies in place in terms of expanding mask orders and requiring people in groups of 4 in commercial vehicles to wear masks and limit gatherings. And that limit of gatherings had an immediate and negative impact on our event industry. And on the one hand, you see the financial health of one industry at risk, and balancing that with the health and safety of the community. We had 2 members pass away who attended at what that point was technically a legal gathering. So for me, the literally and figuratively, the life and death nature of governing in a pandemic became very real. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to make decisions that are going to negatively impact some for the protection of many. And you could probably say that's our role anyway. It's just that I think COVID takes a giant highlighter to that. I am very concerned about burnout in our staff, knowing that this pandemic is not really going anywhere. And a year from now, we'll be very lucky if we have a sense of normalcy and go to our governor's phase 4. So what's our plan to perhaps sustainable resources for assistance on, as Libby, I think, really astutely pointed out, you've got the normal engine of running the business that is our town government that cannot and will not slow down or stop just because there's this other giant pandemic in the room. And I see that most specifically with Roberto and his staff, and I think town administration in particular, are the 2 departments I'm most concerned about. And I think we see that strain come out in different ways, and just permission to speak freely. I think sometimes we see snarky low moments come out of people, perhaps even publicly or in an email, and it's understandable. It's because they're tired and they're exhausted and they're worn down by people who think they're scientists making harassing comments. And we saw a lot of negativity being thrown, particularly at Roberto, but I think at staff in general. And you wouldn't be human if that didn't affect you. So that's a concern of mine. I have served on boards before, and so I do miss the ability to build relationships with board members by going out for coffee, chatting after a meeting, and getting to understand them. Like Don, I find Zoom to be very difficult to stay focused on. Even today, knowing that there's 4 hours of a meeting that would be really easy and comfortable to have in a setting where we were all together. I've got my computer open and I've got staff sending me messages. I've got constituents sending me text messages. I've got 150 emails that are unread from the weekend. So it's difficult to find new ways to build relationships with people. It's not impossible, but I just think it's a team effort. And same with staff. I'm learning what my role is and how to get more involved in understanding what their roles are. Really excited to have been working with Rachel recently on the diversity, equity, and inclusion officer hiring and the HR department on that. So any opportunity I get to work with staff on different initiatives is welcomed by me. Like I think Christy mentioned, I really think that one of the golden nuggets that's emerged from the pandemic is increased public participation and increased ways in which the public can participate. I think that we see that increase in participation not just because they had nothing better to do or that the subject was really compelling to them, but because they have access to participate in ways that they've not ever had access before. So for example, I think we're seeing mothers who maybe didn't feel comfortable leaving from 6 to 9 on a Wednesday night be able to turn on a select board meeting and raise their hand and ask a question during a segment that is appropriate to them because maybe they didn't feel like they could give that time away from their family. Likewise, I think we've seen an increase in participation of people of color, which, you know, I've been in meeting rooms long enough to know that that's not typical. The last meeting, it was a joint meeting between the school committee and the town as the school was going through considering their reopening plans. In some ways could have been run a little bit more effectively, but I also think there was over 600 people watching that and at one point, and we heard comments from folks in our Hispanic community that having served on the school committee for 9 years, unless they were presenting something to the board, I never heard public comment from our Hispanic community members, which is striking because they're over 50% of the population in the school. So that's all to say for me, the access has really been appreciated. And I hope we as a community, and I hope as the state allows some of those flexible policies and participation to continue beyond the pandemic, because it's really, it'd be a shame to close those doors back down. And I know they do provide an additional challenge to the staff. I just want to add in here, I think that our relationship with NCTV 18 has been phenomenal, and they've been fantastic partners to the town. And I just, for one, have appreciated the relationship and how hard our staff works with them to get all this information out to everybody. One of the things that I'm questioning, I know we've questioned for some time, and at one point, very briefly, I was on the town government study committee, but this pandemic has highlighted for me whether or not this form of government is the right form of government for our community at this point. I wish that we had more information and more participation from our current town government study committee members. I don't know where they are, where they're meeting, what they're thinking, but they play, to me, an important role as researchers on behalf of this board to give us some clarity on whether or not what could be improved or what might not be improved. And I'm looking forward to that assessment and that conversation. And I'm not sure if my colleagues agree, but it seems to be something that we should be considering, particularly after we get the new census count. I'll add that I was just simply a community member from March 13th to June 17th, and I found the communication to be frustrating. I felt that I wanted my select board members to have answers that they didn't often have. And I'm not suggesting that this is a fault of anybody. I think we're just having an honest conversation here about ways we could improve and should the next pandemic occur in our tenure. And I also really think that the town could benefit. I know we have a small communications team, but I really think to Jason's point of a communication officer, even just the other day when the DA released the letter about their findings on the African Meeting House, I found myself wishing that we had a communications officer to help us understand if and what our response should be to the community about that letter. So I think that communication with our community is just going to continue to get more complex, and we'd be well served by thinking about that a little bit more. I liked what Christy said about an economic development liaison. I think Janet's done a really great job in that role for the town. And it's really been also highlighted to us how restrictive in some ways Nantucket policymaking has been to businesses, because we wanted to preserve our character and preserve the integrity of our community. And I think we've had a reputation of being, and I'm just going to make gross generalizations, but of not being pro-business. And then really quickly, we had to pivot to be pro-business and find policies and ways that we could support our business community. And so I'm hopeful that we can continue to have that flexible mindset and incorporate some of those protections that we feel like we need to have, and balance those with economic opportunity and really understanding the challenges our business community is facing. How have the protests affected me as a select board member? Well, in every way, in every fiber of my being, it's affected me on a personal level and on a professional level. I am, again, really grateful to be on the committee hiring our diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. And I don't want to put all of my chips on one person because that would be unfair. But I do really look forward to having a leader in place who will help us evaluate our current policies and any potential new policies with the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, to challenge us to think about how some things, doing things the way we've always done them, are there ways we can improve so that we can be more equitable? I just think having that voice and that seat at the table is going to be really, really valuable. And also learning about how we can support, as a select board, policies or practices that encourage participation from people of color, because we are woefully misrepresented at all levels, I think, and who we've hired and who we elect to serve. So it's a great, a new chapter of opportunity for our community. And while the national protests and the pain of that it has brought onto people of color in our community is unbearable at times, I do think the opportunity is that we have the ability to grow and change. And I think we have a great willingness, both as a staff and as a board. So that I'm looking forward to those conversations. I don't even remember the beginning of 2020, to be honest with you. So I don't really remember what was important to me then. I think the Our Island home was like a big one. The solid waste contract. I don't know. It's like, I think David Gray talked about something at the sewer at town meeting. It was like, oh yeah, we got to vote for that. Just got to fix the sewer. Okay. So, you know, I really do rely on Libby to help me remember what all of those operational priorities are. And again, just speaking candidly, that does concern me a little bit that, you know, there's the weight of everyday normal operations. It's not like the pandemic erased or relieved any of those priorities. It just added more. And I'm not entirely sure how we find those supports for the staff in those initiatives. But I think we have to be creative, and town government's not noted for its ability for out of the box thinking and creativity and adaptability. But I think we've also got a very strong board of small business owners who are used to that environment. So hopefully we can find some ways to embrace those new initiatives or things that need to happen, but also creatively find ways to implement them so that we're not just adding burden. And I think that's everything I wanted to say for now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Good morning, Matt. We're glad you've joined us. Your timing is great for participating, not as good for having listened, but we're going to get to circle back to everyone's conversation before. So we're glad you're here. We were just kind of going through the series of prompt questions in terms of processing the pandemic. So I think you should see them on your screen. And your colleagues have had the opportunity to share their responses to these questions. And we're doing a capture of that, which we'll then kind of put front and center in front of you all so that we can have a conversation about what some of those common themes and experiences have been. So with that as a little bit of a chance for you to check all your technology and hopefully feel like you're here in the meeting with us, I'll give you a chance to go ahead and respond to these prompts about how both the pandemic and then the protests have impacted you as a member of the select board.
Well, thanks for, I'm sorry I'm late. I got stuck in something. But thank you. I wish I had heard everybody, what everyone else had to say, because maybe I would sound more intelligent. But sort of, how has the pandemic affected my view of the role as a select board? I would say it's made me more. I've found I've had to be outspoken. I've found that I've had to really think through what I'm thinking and why, and stand up for what I think, and be a bit more of a pain in the butt, I think. And I've felt a little bit, at times I've felt a little bit isolated, to be completely honest. And it's been difficult to remain positive in that for me sometimes. But so I would say that's, my view of my role is, I think it's been to, sort of to question sometimes and to push and to try to bring solution. But how is it impacted how I interact with my colleagues? I'm kind of going into that now. I'd say it's strained. I think at one point it strained relationships. I was trying to bring in sort of ideas and resources and expectations that sometimes weren't embraced. And I was saying some things that people didn't want to hear, I think. And, so I think it has strained my relationship with my colleagues and with the staff, town staff a little bit. I've been working to repair those, as best I can. How have the protests affect you as a select board member? I would say I'm trying to see other people's views more. I mean, as a select board member, I feel like, sort of be more understanding of maybe sort of minority views or people, sort of, it's made me think that a little more. Maybe reach out to people a little bit more than, and sort of give time, respond to everybody. I think it's sort of, is how I've reacted to it. It's been, to be honest, it's been difficult. We're in the busy season between the town stuff we've been dealing with and my own business. And, that hasn't been the top of my list. I see it on the news every night. I think Nantucket in some ways is somewhat insulated, or we feel like we're insulated even though we aren't. Even though we have our own issues, I feel like they're not at the level that they seem to be nationally, for which I think we're somewhat fortunate. But that's probably me as a as a privileged white guy saying that. So what is on my radar that wasn't at 2020? I would say PFAS is on it. COVID is on it. I think we need to up our game on coastal resiliency. And I think we have to figure out how to do better, sort of written plans and accountability. I think our enforcement on some of these things needs to be improved, but those are the main things.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all. My colleague Julie's going to send an email, and we're going to shift gears here of what we're sharing with you all, and give you a chance to kind of reflect on what you've heard. And I know the staff is listening and taking notes, and we want to allow the board to kind of have this conversation this morning. So, kind of reflecting on what you heard, is interesting to hear a couple of themes. I think, certainly DEI, communications, and economic development will be part of that. When you talk about themes today. So I want you to, interested in having you all kind of chime in. What did you hear? And Libby, if there's some things that you're reflecting on, listening to the board, I absolutely want you to also share that perspective. So who would like to kick us off?
Would we be able to go back to those questions?
Oh yeah, we can put the questions up. We may even be able to put the questions up and then toggle back with the picture.
Yeah.
Hold on. Just give us a quick second.
I just had a few things to comment on, unless that was an exercise solely for the board.
No, that's fine. Please. I think everyone would want to hear from you. So got it?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up and I just got the image.
There we go. All right, and we've got the image. Awesome. We're seeing the blank. You're popping it in. Okay, there you go, Libby.
Okay, thank you very much. I won't really take too much time. How has the pandemic affected how you view your role? I would say that I found myself doing a lot of coordinating and a lot of trying to tie up loose ends that were all over the place. It was important more than ever for the town, to try to have the same message. There were times when messages were coming from board members individually and town staff that were not the same thing. And that caused confusion. And I realized that I think part of my role is to make sure that doesn't happen, which means a lot of coordination and a lot of communication. Hold on, I needed the, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. We have a screen confusion issue. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess more, not just managing the whole situation as the town manager, but coordinating the response in many ways. Let me move this, hold on. How has the COVID-19 environment impacted how you interact with your colleagues, constituents, town staffers, work was been frustrating? I think that our EOC team worked very well together. I think we were in a room for just about 6 weeks, every day, all day, just about, including a lot of weekends. And I think we certainly got to know each other a lot better, but we talked through a lot of things. So the team approach and making sure we have a very strong team for a response like this, I think that definitely impacted me. Getting constituents the same information more quickly. Same with town staff. I think on the town staff side, we were lucky to have our HR director really take the bull by the horns, and we got out information very quickly and very completely. I think I didn't hear any complaints from town staff that they didn't know what was going on and that they were unsatisfied with the town's response. So that worked. We had these videos that we sent out. Those, I think, were really helpful. Maybe more of that in our future. Frustrations were multiple, and some of them were probably my own doing, and some were the doings of others. One thing, and I think it was mentioned a little bit by one of you, Christy maybe said this, or Melissa, when the board members all get an email, sometimes the town staff is not on it and no one answers it, or one person answers it, or two people answer it with a different response. So this isn't the only time that happens, but it's the time that it's happened the most in my experience here. And that was really hard because I think the emails were coming fast and furious. And just like we were trying to do, the board members were trying to get back to their constituents as quickly as possible. And sometimes they didn't have the information, and sometimes they did, or sometimes it was an opinion. And that hampered things from time to time. We were really trying to use the chair to get information to the board. And nonetheless, there were other board members that were emailing, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? We found ourselves going down dead ends from time to time that we had already answered. We can't prevent people from coming to Nantucket on the boat, for example. But we heard this over and over. Why can't we? They did it in Maine. Well, it turns out they didn't do it in Maine. It was illegal in Maine. So the town staff saying we can't do that was not even, it was ignored until it was proven else by a newspaper article that we can't do that, even though we've been saying it. It just, things like that were very frustrating. So that makes the communications all the more important. I hope that when we started doing the sit reps daily and then weekly and then a little bit more sporadically more often, those helped. I did get some good feedback from the board. I almost wish I had gotten more feedback from the board. This is helpful. This isn't helpful. Could you add more about this or that? Those types of things are good for me to know. So I guess that was a bit frustrating. It's frustrating to have, Matt, when you say that people didn't want to hear what you were saying things we didn't want to hear. The staff level anyway, it wasn't we didn't want to hear it. It's that you're one person saying do this, do that, but there's 4 other board members who are not saying that. So we're left to think, well, do we do what Matt is saying, or do we go with the majority of the board? Sometimes it was voted, sometimes it wasn't. So we're a little bit sometimes at a loss, because then it sort of seems to turn into at the meeting, well, staff isn't doing what I asked them to do, but nobody else asked for it to happen. So we're kind of, again, at a little bit of a loss. What worked though, I think, hopefully, again, those sit reps worked. And I was actually thinking, I wonder if I should start doing that once a week, but don't write that down, because it does take a lot of time to do them. But I do sometimes think they might be a little helpful. Use of social media, that worked very well. And I think we definitely want to keep up with that. We, between Greg and Florencia, and sometimes even Rachel and others, they were at this constantly. A PIO, could that be helpful? Yes, and Greg was the PIO for a while, but some of this stuff was so specialized that it really couldn't be answered by the PIO. It had to go to Roberto or somebody else who has the knowledge about things like that, like the DA's press release. That would really take somebody who has some knowledge of that process, and that isn't a town, generated document. So stuff like that, just there's a way to do it, but it does take some specialized work. How the protests affected, I'm going to say this affected me as town manager. I would say that the protests themselves have had an impact on the way I view things and the way I think town government should run. But underlying that, the African Meeting House incident has had a profound impact on me personally. And I think you all know that. The March 11th select board meeting was a turning point for me, I think, in the way that I react to the public. I've addressed that meeting publicly. And I think as a result, I have rethought that meeting hundreds of times and tried to reframe it. There were a lot of underlying circumstances at that meeting that people perhaps are not aware of. It's really hard to navigate through different narratives that are not always factual, but they are what people believe. So I'm finding myself really differently listening about what people are saying with respect to not just that incident, but the protests. And I've done a couple of my webinars on my own about racial equity and diversity and inclusion. And Jason said this a number of times, it's the tip of the iceberg. There are so many things to think about that it's almost mind-boggling, really, to have to change your whole way of thinking. So it's good that we're going to be getting the position to help us all with that. And that's something that wasn't on our radar, I don't think, at the beginning of 2020, moving into that item. PFAS also, as Matt said, our budget is going to be an issue. We are already talked here about additional resources for things, communications officer or position. That would be great, but it does take money, and it's not a cheap position. It takes somebody with that expertise. And we definitely need to think out of the box on some of this stuff, because sometimes I feel like I've thought there's no more box to think out of. So some of those things are definitely going to have to get creative, because again, I'm trying to have the big picture in my mind about, well, there's that. And so that's, X dollars, but also I got DPW saying, if you want me to do brush cutting and replace split rail fences and get to the potholes, I need more people. And we don't have the money for more people. So if we don't have the money for that, how are we going to have the money for these other things? So priorities probably are something that have to be rearranged. Narita, not a concern. So I think those are the things that I have thoughts on about those questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the thoughtfulness and everyone adding their voice to this conversation. So I want to kind of go back to, what are you hearing for themes? What is, how do you think this impacts what you all do as a board kind of moving forward, and how the town administration works to continue to support the priorities of the board? Yeah, Jason, thank you.
I think one thing that I've taken away from listening to everybody here is we're all looking for silver linings this year, and one of them could be, and this is from what I'm hearing from everybody saying, is that we're doing a better job of listening and learning, and I think that's in a lot of different ways. Like, Julie, what you and your group did with us, with the chamber, with the business communities, like we really listened to what their issues were and their challenges, and how could the town help. We've never really done that before, not at that level. All of us looking back at all of our roles in the EOC and the select board, and how do we listen to each other better, right? It was really challenged, right? This pandemic pulled out every crack, every weakness that our individual leadership had, our organizational functionality. Like, it really showed us kind of maybe where like the weaknesses were. And with everything on our plate, I really believe this community is under-resourced. If you look at our tax base and the money coming in, we're not the richest municipality in the world. Like, we're really under-resourced. So it's hard to listen and learn and have that approach. There's no time. I got to get all this done by 5 o'clock, and I'm going home to do this. And I think we can continue to do this, right? Look at how we're working with the hospital through COVID. Like Roberto and his team and the hospital are, that's two entities that never worked together like that before. The town has had different conversations with the chamber and our business community, right? And our Amy Baxter and Roberto have done such a good job of trying to work with all those different entities. right? You got Taylor Hilst and our human services working with all the nonprofits. Like, we've never done those things at this level before. So that listening and learning and that cooperation, I think we can really take away and continue this. And I've heard bits and pieces of that, challenges and opportunities there, and what everybody was saying. That's what I was writing down, sketching as everybody was talking.
Okay, great. We're going to get the graphic from Julie, and we'll get it posted here to give you guys something to look at as we're continuing this conversation. Other reflections?
I guess not so much of a reflection, but more of a comment. I'm really happy that Matt brought up the PFAS issue, because I think that is, going to be treated in some ways like an emergency, not so different from the pandemic, and it's going to require coordinated communication and responses, and I think just a lot of hard work to protect our community's health and safety. And I'm remiss that I didn't mention it before Matt did. I'm really happy you showed up and said it, Matt. But I think just a comment that, some of these lessons learned that we're talking about now with the pandemic can and should be applied to how we approach the PFAS issue.
Thank you. And Christy, I saw your hand coming up.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, after hearing everybody talk, one of the things that I was thinking about was, as we're going through our strategic plan, really trying to think long term. So I know there's so many things being thrown at us, and, how can we use the pandemic to help us make better decisions for the future, but not being so quick to maybe say, like, this thing on a strategic plan isn't a priority anymore, or, PFAS comes up, we have to jump to that. But, if COVID is here in 12 months, what are decisions that we still want to be making, moving towards housing, transportation, environmental leadership? And then if it is still here in 12 months, what are those decisions? And if it's not, what do those decisions look like? But just trying to still think of what a post-COVID world might look like, or how we're going to live with it, and not be so short to jump to some decisions.
Yeah, really important. Melissa.
I agree with that, Christy, and it actually reminded me of something I wanted to touch on, which is, Jason mentioned the cracks that COVID exposed, and I think, it really did expose the inequity in housing, and actually what a life or death situation that can be for so many people in our community who are forced, by one reason or another, to live in crowded and unsafe living conditions. And that during a pandemic, you really don't want that situation for any human being because of the rather virulent exposure if the virus transmits in those housing situations, how dangerous that is. And whether that's COVID-19 or any other issue, it really brought to light that I think the tenuous anxiety we live with every day until we can get most of our community members living in safe, affordable housing. So for me, that became not just it became a health issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so something that was already a priority becomes a heightened priority because of new conditions. Yeah.
Exactly.
Other reflection? Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I read through our strategic plan again, getting ready for this. And what kind of strikes me is we've got some, I think COVID and PFAS and a couple of things, and I look at some of this time we spend, on other issues. Sometimes we spent more time renaming, with more research and better work done, renaming a road recently than we did on some of these major issues that, and so, how do we find a way to, there may be things that we have to really put to the top of the, top of the pile and trying to find a way not to, sort of sometimes we spend a lot of time and the staff spends a lot of time, selling individuals yard sale parcels, and that's all well and good. But if that's taking time away from enforcement or taking time away from, water quality or some of the other big issues, we have to really rethink it. And we should be thinking it on a lot of different levels, because if you don't have unlimited funds and you don't have unlimited staff, then you have to pick and choose and prioritize what your staff does. And I think that, we need to get to that level on some of this. And I agree with Jason that what the pandemic showed are strengths and weaknesses, and we have some really good strengths in communication. Some of those things the town is very strong at, and other things, sort of writing things down and knowing what we're going to do when, and, and relaying that for accountability, I don't think we're as strong at. And when in the act of doing that is what gets you to realize, oh, well, this is more important than that. And so sometimes just the act of writing it down and it gets you to the level of understanding what we should be doing. So somehow, I hope that this session gets us to what are really the most important things this year. I think housing has come to the top. We've got the biggest year ever, and year-round neighborhoods, year-round houses are being snapped up as second homes and seasonal rentals, and it's going to be even harder. So I think that one, I think item 4, I think goal 4, we need to spend some time on, and then I would like pare down some of the other stuff.
Okay, good. Those are good reflections and segues into our afternoon conversation. So I appreciate that. Others on this pandemic. Yeah, Jason.
I'm glad that a couple different people, not just Libby, but Melissa and others, brought up kind of the, overwhelming feeling and kind of burnt outness of staff. And I got, this came out in the beginning of COVID. You got a lot of this from the public of, oh, but the town staff still has their jobs. They're just sitting at home. Like, how hard can it be? And, I didn't know exactly how to push back on that or how to have that conversation. But as time went, I tried to explain it in the sense of, well, public safety and hospital workers are also getting a full paycheck, and they're working their butt off. And we understand that, but how does that not apply to town staff, right? Everybody is dealing with a lot in 2020 with family members, fear of a family member getting sick or themselves, and all this extra weight of doing our job. So I don't think just because you have a paycheck that it takes away from what you're doing. So I'm glad that that's coming up. I think, Melissa, you brought it up, that we need to recognize that everybody is under all this pressure, and there is more pressure if you don't have a job, right? But it cannot take away from town staff and our town leadership that is working overtime, trying to figure how to get us through this. And so I'm glad it's brought up. I think we need to keep talking about it if it's even still out there. I haven't heard it lately. But I wasn't able to kind of combat that in the beginning until kind of later this summer and know how to explain it to people. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
You're saying you're not sure that if the lack of empathy is out there. The staff has still got a lot, but just wonder if people appreciate that.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that if you have a full-time job, you're fine.
Yeah.
Whether it's town staff or you work for another company, right? That everything's fine. And it's not that way. Everyone's having a tough time dealing with this.
Yeah. Everyone's got something for sure. Yeah, Melissa.
I just want to, add on to what Jason's saying, because I think that we feel that tension throughout the community. just most recently, again, with the Board of Health decision, how do we make it policy that's going to impact, one industry in particular? And on the other hand, you've got parents who are saying we've not perhaps done enough to protect the community, not had strict enough policies that would protect the community from the spread of the virus, and thereby kids are the sort of sacrificial lambs by not being able to go back to school. And so, the balance, learning how to balance those decisions is a continual challenge for me. And I'm sure it is for every person who's either, working in town government or serving in a role. And I just wanted to also say that I think I think I may have lost my thought. I may have to come back to it.
Okay.
It's coming.
Come back if it comes back.
I'm supposed to be the one with the senior moments, Melissa.
I know. Well, there's kind of a lot going on right now.
Right. It's the Zoom moments of like, four
Yeah.
emails just showed up and I try not to look, right? It's hard. It's hard. Let me invite Libby, your team, any reflections overall about kind of what you're hearing from the board and how this, and kind of how you all process this shared experience?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly hearing some themes about communication, but I don't know that I'm hearing, how we're going to handle it totally.
Yeah.
There's some ideas out there, but one of the communications needs to be among the board members themselves. So, getting back to the email that sometimes 5 board members get, but town admin never got it. Who's going to respond to them? Or even if we are on it, I try to figure out what our response is going to be. And sometimes I try to get it out there before, as soon as I can, so that the board can see, okay, I've responded to this. But I think we need a kind of a way to agree on how those things are going to be handled. At some point, not right this second.
So DEI, you guys got out there early and you're filling a position, and then this communications and what do we do about responding to the business community and thinking more broadly about economic development are still a couple of big question marks for how you might process and handle that. Melissa, I saw your hand. Did it come back to you?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. And I think it's just that community-wide, and this I think we talked about in the Board of Health meeting also, we're seeing COVID fatigue. So, one thing that's very concerning to me as we prepare to go into, and I think Don mentioned this, fall and winter, which is going to be much more economically challenging. We don't have the bright light at the end of some tunnel that our season's going to pick up soon, like we did in April. We kept holding out hope in April for something to kick in so we could get contractors back to work, landscapers back to work, get everybody back to work. And now that season is over. We've got potential of, surging happening, and frankly, people feeling exhausted by the restrictions that have been in place in one way or another. And then combining that with, tired staff and maybe even tired board members. I just think that we have to emerge from these conversations with a renewed sense of how we're going to work together to combat that generalized sense of fatigue. Because in some ways, I think we're entering a much more difficult 6 months than perhaps the previous 6 months were.
Yeah. That's really a great kind of comment to help us transition to our afternoon conversation, because it truly is in that context that we're going to talk about, well, what do our priorities need to be? So I want to, we're going to take a break today before that 1 o'clock meeting begins. I want to ask the chair, did you want to see if there was interest in public input? We do have a couple of, I think there's one member of the public that is attending it as an attendee right now. So if you wanted to invite their participation, I would welcome that.
Yes, happy to. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to give us any input before we adjourn for lunch? I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay, well, I wanted to make sure we created that opportunity, and we were gonna, when we come back, just logistically, Erica, do we sign into this same meeting?
Yes, so we
Okay.
will do a recess, and then when we come back, you just do the same exact link and you should be good, and we'll reconvene then.
Awesome, thank
I
you
don't-
so much.
I deleted that email. Is there possible for NCTV to resend it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll see you all at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.